During World War I, there was a saying that came about that is still well known today. It's this: there are no atheists in a foxhole. And of course, what that means is that when people are placed under stress, when people have a challenge, that frequently, somehow they know within themselves that there's something that they can turn to. Something that is greater than they are. What is that something? What is it that somehow we seem to know is part of us, that's there, that we can turn to if we really need something? The scripture that I'd like to share with you is taken from the 11th chapter of Matthew, the 25th verse. I thank thee, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that thou hast hidden these things from the wise and the understanding, and revealed them to babes. There was a village in Italy that had a church in the center of the village, and it was a magnificent church. One of the things that they were so very proud of in this church was that there was a painting on one wall. It's called a fresco. And it was so very special, it was of the Holy Family. And the congregants of that church were so very proud, they invited people from all over the land to come and see this marvelous painting. During World War II, a tragic thing happened. The church was bombed. And the church was damaged heavily. In fact, half of the wall that painting was on was reduced to rubble. After the war was over, there was an effort to rebuild the church. Everything was restored to the way it once was, except that wall now, even though it had been rebuilt, now only had half of that magnificent painting. The rest of it was just a blank white wall. And so the congregants sought all of the art experts to come and to look at that painting and try to decide if it could be restored. Well, many prominent artists looked at it, and they finally decided there's something about this painting that we're just not sure we can duplicate. Oh, we can try to reconstruct it, but I think the very trained eye will always see the original as compared to the restoration. And the priest decided that that was not acceptable. And so it was left as it was. One day, a very old man wandered into town. And he went up to the church and he asked to see the priest. And as he was talking to the priest, he said, I'd like to try my hand at restoring that painting. Now, the priest was astounded. This was a very old man. He looked very unkempt. He didn't look like a professional artist. But the old man persisted. At least let me try. And so finally the priest said, well, all right, take a very far corner of this painting and demonstrate what you can do. The priest came back later that day to inspect what the old man had done and was astonished. The colors were exactly the same. Somehow he even was capturing the very spirit of that painting. And so he agreed that the old man should restore that work of art. After after several months, the painting was completely restored. A great celebration, as you might imagine. Someone finally asked the old man, "How are you able to do what no one else thought they could do?" And the old man smiled. And he said, "What you don't realize was that it was me, as a young man, that painted the original picture. It was me who made that picture, and it is me who can restore it to its natural beauty." Isn't that like God? Isn't that how we think of God? It is God who has created everything. And it is God who can restore all things. What is it that we need God to restore? How do we see God? Exactly what is God? One of the greatest questions that so many of us face. I'm reminded of a story of some blind men. Perhaps you've heard it. A group of blind men was being taken on a field trip to the local zoo. Once they got to the zoo, they were led to the compound where there was an elephant. There was a keeper of the elephant inside the compound, and he invited each blind man to come up to the elephant so that they could actually feel of that elephant. The first blind man was led up, and he felt the side of that great animal. And he said, "You know, an elephant is like a large leathery wall." Then the second blind man was led up to the head of the elephant. And he grasped the trunk of that elephant, and he was feeling of the trunk, and he said, "No." He said, "An elephant is like a large snake." The third blind man was led in, and he felt of the tail of the elephant. He thought, "No, an elephant is more like a buggy whip." And finally, the last blind man was led in, and he grasped the leg of that great animal and put his arms around that leg. And he said, "You're all wrong. An elephant is like a tree trunk." Now, the object of that story, of course, is that each blind man perceived an elephant according to his own experience. And isn't that like we experience God? We experience God according to our own experience. We experience God by what someone has told us, by what we think God is like. So God really is a matter of personal perception, a matter of how we see it. Now, as I go on in trying to help us to understand exactly how we can see God, even though it is a matter of something that is an individual thing, there are some things that we can understand together. And I was thinking really about the statement that is made at the very beginning of this service. You remember that as we're starting, we always say God is one presence, one power. So what does that mean? If we look at the first four words in the book of Genesis, you remember what they are? In the beginning, God. And to me, that means more than most of what comes afterward. Why is it? Because it demonstrates to us that there was a time, there is a time, when there is only God. Once we come to that realization, I've often, in talking to other people, pointing that out to them, I've asked the question, if there was only God, then what did God create from? The rest of the story goes on to say God created. Well, what did he create from since there was only him? The only logical explanation that I've ever been able to come up with is that God created from his own essence. It's all there was at that time. It's all there is now. The very essence of God. And what that means to us is that we are created from the essence of God. God is within us. We are a part of God. When we're trying to define what God is, then we need to look at ourselves as well as all of the creation. I'm what God is. You are what God is. Sometimes people really like to press you for an answer when there's a question such as, what is God? And I think the only answer I've ever discovered in the entire Bible that addresses that question is contained in the book of John. It answers the question, what is God? The answer, God is love. Now, some of us might be rather perplexed by that and think, well, love is kind of an ambiguous term, isn't it? What does love mean? Especially in the English language, it means so many different things that it kind of loses its meaning. We think of love as just a feeling. And yet I think love is so much more than just a feeling. I think it's a power. I think it's an energy. I think that's literally what God is. God is a power, an energy, a force. Our minds, in trying to think of this subject, might be tempted to say, well, that's really beyond what I can comprehend. I'm not sure about all that. I remember one time I was delivering a message similar to this in California. And I came up to this part of the message and I asked a question. I said, what exactly is electricity? And I was kind of surprised. I'm not used to people responding in the middle of a message like this, but someone raised their hand and said, I know. There's someone here that knows. And this woman pointed to someone else in the congregation. She said, we have a professor of electrical engineering in our midst, and he can tell us what electricity is. Well, that professor stood up, had a smile on his face. He was a professor at Stanford University. And he said, I know a lot of things about electricity. Probably more than most people. But he said, I'm not sure that I can tell you exactly and precisely what electricity is. I know what it does. I know a lot about the qualities of electricity. But I would never put on one of my exams a question for the students, what is electricity? Because I'm not sure I know myself. All I know is it's an energy, it's a power, it's a force. And isn't that true of God as well? We don't really have to know exactly and precisely what God is in order to appreciate God's love and God's power. We go to the back of the room and we flip a switch and the lights go on and off, and we don't have to understand how that works or why it works or what force is coming through those wires. All we know is it works. The same is true of God. If we can make that connection to God, the light comes on. And we don't have to know exactly and precisely what God is. God is love. God is an energy. God is a power. God is a force. But we don't have to understand exactly how that works in order to benefit from love. One of the points that I'd like to share with you this morning is not only is that force available to you, but there are certain ways that we can enhance the ability to tap into that force. And I wish that I were capable of saying there's one size that fits all. It really is a very unique thing. Everyone experiences God in their own way. But I think there are certain methods that assist us in experiencing God. Some of those methods are simply the realization, as I mentioned earlier, that that power, that force is within us. It's ever available. It's not something that we have to search for and pray unceasingly or whatever religious people tell us that we must do. It's simply there. And I think that there's a knowing within us concerning that love, that power. And once we are able to convince ourselves, so to speak, that that power is ever there, ever available, it then leads to the second thing that we can do. In the Bible, once again, there's a verse that says, "Be still and know that I am." If we can quiet ourselves, our thinking, our activities, to the point where we at least allow God to make his presence felt and known, it helps for us to make that connection. There's such a need, isn't there? Not just in times of crisis, not just in times of trial, but I think that so many of us just need to experience God in order to have that peace that we so long for. Such a need. And if we're able then to quiet our minds, so to speak, and I read a spiritual author who made this comment. He said, even if you can no more than have a desire to know God, that's all it takes, just a desire. And then the Course in Miracles tells us that if we have just a little willingness, it's miraculous what God can do with a little desire, a little willingness. We want peace. We want direction in our life. A little desire, a little willingness. close my thoughts this morning by sharing something else from the Course in Miracles. This is probably one of my favorite things that I have read in the Course in Miracles, and I'm sure other students of the Course in Miracles will agree with me on this particular thought that's presented. Now do you know him not, but you are free to learn of him, and learn of him anew. Only be quiet. You will need no rule but this to let your practicing today lift you above the thinking of the world and free your vision from your body's eyes. Only be still and listen. Simply do this. Be still and lay aside all thoughts of what you are and what God is, all concepts you have learned about the world, all images that you hold of yourself. Empty your mind of everything it thinks is either true or false, or good or bad, of every thought it judges worthy, and all of the ideas of which you hold in this moment. Hold on to nothing. Do not bring one thought with you. Do not think of the past, nor one belief you ever learned before from anything. Forget this world. Forget this present moment. And come to God with holy hands. Amen.